Welcome to Fashion And with me, Scott Schiavone, Fashion Curator. Just a reminder that you can keep up to date with everything Fashion And by following @Fashion And with Scott Schiavone on Instagram and by hitting that subscribe button. This episode is dedicated to a fashion icon who not only changed the course of female fashion but also embodied the spirit of her times. This is Fashion and Chanel. Dress shabbily and they remember the dress. Dress impeccably and they remember the woman. Gabrielle Coco Chanel was one of the most influential fashion designers of the 20th century. Chanel embodied her own ideal, and images of her have crystallised in our memory the image of a woman whose style was ahead of its time. From the offset, her designs rejected all prior notions of beauty and elegance and were characterised by modernity and an iconography of strict codes. Rarely expressing the trend-driven exaggerations of the period, such as the flounces of the 1910s, the wide shoulders of the 1930s, or the wasp-like waists of the 1950s, Chanel always referenced the natural lines of the body. Whether a simple straw boater, a tailored jersey ensemble, or a mariner-style pullover, Chanel's effortless chic prioritised the female form, comfort, simplicity, and functionalism. In this episode, we will be exploring the life, work and house of Chanel through 4 themes: Coco before Chanel, Mademoiselle Chanel, the vocabulary of Chanel, and Chanel after Chanel. The story of Chanel's rise is exceptional, from an impoverished childhood in 19th century France to her self-realisation as an archetype of the post-World War I New Woman. Gabrielle Bonheur Chanel was born on the 19th of August 1883 in Saumur, Maine-et-Loire in France. Her mother, Eugénie Jean de Vol, was a laundress and her father, Albert Chanel, a street vendor who sold work clothes and undergarments. Her mother died when Gabrielle was just 11 and her father sent his 2 sons to work on a farm and his 3 daughters to a convent orphanage in Aubazine. Whilst at the orphanage, Gabrielle learnt how to sew with great flair, a skill that would shape the course of her future. At 18, she went to a Catholic boarding school for girls in the town of Moulins, where, dressed in her hand-me-down clothes, she was educated alongside well-dressed girls from wealthy families. 2 years later, Gabrielle left to work as a seamstress but dreamt of a life on the stage, so in the evenings, between acts at the Café Concert La Rotonde, Gabrielle would perform with her sister Adrienne. Whilst one sang, the other went round with a plate collecting tips. Gabrielle was known for singing Qui a vu Coco, earning her the nickname Coco. At La Rotonde, she met Etienne Bolsan, heir to a large textile firm, and subsequently became his live-in mistress. She socialised with his society friends at his country estate and at the races. Rejecting the trappings of Belle Epoch fashion, she would wear simple, pared-down clothing and sometimes even Bolsan's suits customised to fit her body. In a business venture financed by Bolsan, Gabrielle Chanel began her fashion career in 1910 as a milliner. Chanel's hats were simple, clean and devoid of superfluous material. Her refusal to adorn them with a mass of embellishments was striking at a time when more was more. Completely at odds with the current fashion trends, Gabrielle's simplicity became the new eccentricity. By 1910, Gabrielle had fallen in love with a wealthy English businessman, Arthur Boy Capel, who assisted her in further developing her fashion empire. With Capel's help, Gabrielle set up a shop on the Rue Cambon and in the fashionable seaside resort of Deauville, where in 1913 she opened a shop selling hats and sportswear. Due to their success, Gabrielle opened another store in Biarritz, where in 1916 she presented her first haute couture collection. The collection was a triumph and garnered international press. Chanel was applauded for her easy pared-down style, and although not the only designer championing this more relaxed style, it was Gabrielle Chanel who gave it popular appeal. Despite her hopes of settling down, in 1918 Capel married an English aristocrat, Lady Diana Wyndham, and Gabrielle was relegated to mistress. Capel tragically died in a car accident the following year. Selling at top prices, the couturier's dresses were so popular that she was able to pay off her debts and attain financial independence. Gabrielle Chanel would never be a kept woman again. In 1918, she opened her couture house at 31 Rue Cambon, that iconic address that would forever be associated with her name. In the years following World War I, with a brave new world came a new kind of fashion, and almost overnight Chanel became a celebrity. Chanel was not merely a designer, she was a fashion ambassador, perfectly embodying the spirit of her times, and thanks to her work, her couture house and her fashion empire, she had become the dictionary definition of the 1920s garçon, a young woman leading an independent life. In a world previously dominated by male couturiers such as Worth, Jean Patou and Lucien Lelong, Mademoiselle Chanel reigned supreme. By embodying her design ethos and wearing the same clothes as and socialising with her clients, Chanel achieved acceptance among the wealthy and powerful elite. Chanel created a feminine personage of a sort. Never before seen, she represented a new being. In the 1920s, her use of jersey, tweed, sailor shirts, baggy trousers, cardigan suits and her signature little black dress reflected how women's lives had changed since World War I. Chanel was charging anywhere between 3,000 and 5,000 francs for a jersey dress, based not on the materials or the quality of the workmanship, which was extremely high, but on the symbolic power of her unconventional fashion statements. Chanel's designs of the 1930s were unapologetically luxurious, reflected in her evening dresses and in her accessories and costume jewellery. In 1939, at the beginning of World War II, claiming it as a patriotic move, Chanel closed her couture house, saying that it wasn't a time for fashion. During the German occupation of Paris, Chanel resided at the Hotel Ritz, also a German military base, and began a romantic liaison with Baron Hans Gunther von Dinklage, a German operative in military intelligence. After the liberation of Paris, in September 1944, Chanel was accused of being involved in Operation Model Hut, Operation Couture Hat, as a secret agent for the Nazis. Chanel was arrested, but after the intervention of her friend Winston Churchill, was released. In 1945, Chanel was exiled to Switzerland. The styles that Chanel had fought so hard against in her early career re-emerged as the epitome of glamour and elegance with Christian Dior's new look. Chanel was enraged. Pure raging. In February 1954, still disgraced from her involvement with the Nazis, her first collection in 15 years was met with scathing reviews from the French and English press. The American press, however, declared, "Her influence is unmistakable. Chanel has lost none of her skill." Chanel threw herself into her work, determined to regain her position as the queen of couture, and in less than 3 years she had done it. Despite resisting new fashions in the 1960s, it was during her second coming that Mademoiselle Chanel cemented her iconic vocabulary of style into the lexicon of fashion history. Chanel did not follow fashions, she created her own. She created a design vocabulary that was distinctive and immediately recognisable. In their cut and construction, Chanel's clothes reveal an almost obsessive fixation on the accommodation of the female form. The Chanel body was boyish and small-breasted with natural hips and waist. Her designs, made from lace, tulle, jersey, chiffon, georgette, crêpe de chine and loosely woven tweeds, reduced and streamlined the silhouette with a subtle fluidity. I wanted to give a woman comfortable clothes that would flow with her body. A woman is closest to being naked when she is well dressed. During World War I, shortages in resources meant that Chanel was able to acquire wool jersey, a fabric that had been reserved for hosiery and men's undergarments, at reasonable prices. She transformed jersey into dresses, softly draped suits with ankle-length skirts and deliberately oversized cardigans that women were clambering to wear. This was the advent of the modern woman, and the clothes she wore reflected the changes in her role in society. Chanel's customers were now equipped to take on the new tasks of everyday life, since their men were away at war. Between 1912 and 1913, the actress Suzanne Orlandi was one of the first women to wear a Chanel little black dress in velvet with a white collar. Black had an extremely personal connection to Chanel, as it was the colour the nuns wore at the orphanage where she grew up. "Before me, no one would have dared wear black," Chanel said. Not true for the entire history of fashion, but true for Chanel's era. Chanel's little black dress first appeared in American Vogue in October 1926 as the frock that all the world will wear. Chanel's little black dress democratised fashion, abolishing the frippery associated with high society, becoming like a modern day uniform and proving that simplicity was not synonymous with poverty. Chanel No. 5 was launched in 1921 and captured the liberated feminine spirit of the 1920s. It was created by perfumer Ernest Beau. The name is said to have come from the number of the sample file that Beau presented to Chanel, and the bottle design was inspired by Arthur Capel's Chavette toiletry bottles. In 1924, Chanel made an agreement with the Wertheimer brothers, Pierre and Paul, from perfume house Bourjois. For a 10% share, Chanel licensed her name and removed herself from involvement in all business operations. Chanel herself was the first face of the fragrance, appearing in the advertisement published by Harper's Bazaar in 1937. During World War II, Chanel was unhappy with her No. 5 agreement. She tried to take advantage of the Nazi seizure of all Jewish-owned property and businesses. The Wertheimers were Jewish, and Chanel exploited her position as an Aryan to petition German officials to legalise her right to sole ownership. However, in 1941, the Wertheimers, foreseeing the Nazi takeover, had turned control of Parfum Chanel over to a Christian French businessman. After the war, Parfum Chanel was returned to the Wertheimers. Despite Chanel's Nazi sympathies, the Wertheimers graciously renegotiated and came to an agreement with Chanel. She received her share of the wartime profits of Chanel No. 5, a staggering $25 million a year, making her one of the richest women in the world. Chanel manipulates tweed with extraordinary skill. Chanel discovered tweed in the early 1920s through her romantic relationship with the Duke of Westminster. Tweed suits became the symbol of her comeback in the 1950s. The ultimate symbol of elegance, simplicity, precision and modernity, the Chanel tweed suit turned its back on fashion to create its own world of style. Her tweeds were supremely light and supple. She didn't use stiffening or shoulder pads and cut her jackets on the straight grain without bust darts to allow for greater freedom of movement. She quilted the lining and weighted the edges with fine brass chain so that it hung perfectly. Pockets were not just for show, and braiding replaced hems. Instead of having a belt, the skirt of the suit used grosgrain across the hips for increased comfort. In February 1955, Chanel created what would become the 2.55, named for the date of its creation. Rectangular in shape, the bag's flap, stitched quilted decoration and twist clasp, known as the Mademoiselle clasp, were eminently practical. The chain strap echoed the chatelaines worn by the caretakers at the orphanage where she grew up, and the signature lining of burgundy leather was a reference to the colour of her uniform at the orphanage too. In the 1980s, Karl Lagerfeld retained its original basic form, but redesigned the clasp and lock to incorporate the Chanel logo, and interlaced leather throughout the shoulder chain. The flower most associated with Chanel is the camellia. The white flower has been associated with longevity, desire, perfection, and love. The camellia had a direct reference to Alexandre Dumas' play La Dame aux Camélias, The Lady of the Camellias. Dumas' heroine and her story had resonated with Gabrielle Chanel since her youth. Allegedly, Chanel was also given her first bouquet of camellias by her lover, Arthur Capel. As early as 1913, the designer would adorn herself with silk versions of the white flower, and before long, the camellia came to be identified with the House of Chanel. Chanel's costume jewellery challenged the conventions of the aristocracy and bourgeoisie, who flaunted theirs as badges of social status. Jewellery offered Chanel a rich outlet for her creativity, and inspiration came from Venice, Byzantium, Persia, Art Deco and the Celts. Chanel loved jewellery in abundance, which was reflected in the way she wore it, layering strings of pearls over her high necklines and adding bracelets, brooches and chains. Karl Lagerfeld referenced her love of jewellery and paid homage to the designer in his 1983 Chanel Haute Couture collection. Using a technique known as trompe-l'oeil, Lagerfeld enlisted the unparalleled skill of historic French embroidery house Maison Lesage to adorn a simple black dress with embroideries, beading and cut gemstones to emulate the medieval, Byzantium and Renaissance style jewellery designed and worn by Gabrielle Chanel herself. Casually flung strings of pearls, giant brooches and swags of chains injected a playful, free-spiritedness into the strict house codes of Chanel. By transforming her personal taste into an intolerant and inflexible gospel of elegance, she made herself unfashionable at the end of the 1960s in the eyes of the public. After Chanel's death in 1971, the house had lost its mainstream status in the world of fashion. Enter Karl Lagerfeld. Karl Lagerfeld was exactly the kind of designer Chanel needed, and from 1983 onwards, skillfully but subtly united Chanel's past with the present. Karl Lagerfeld put Chanel back on the fashion map, adapting and revamping the brand and freeing the house from its bourgeois ghetto, injecting a breath of fresh air. His shows included skaters, skiers, mountain climbers, hockey players, supermarkets, airports, space shuttles and ski lodges. Collection after collection, Lagerfeld let his imagination run riot. For Lagerfeld, there was limitless scope for interpreting the Chanel style. Each design was sprinkled with elements of the classic Chanel vocabulary: gold chains, artificial pearls, camellias and other Chanel identifiers. The effect on the runway was striking and offbeat. The clothes looked great in magazines, and above all they appealed to a cool new brand of fashion-conscious client. Chanel knew how to create images of herself powerful enough to achieve a sort of immortality, making the timeless exist in the immediate. These are the deep secrets of the Chanel style. During Lagerfeld's 36-year tenure at Chanel, he produced up to 10 collections a year, including haute couture, ready-to-wear, cruise and the métier d'art. Karl Lagerfeld turned Chanel into a billion-dollar brand. But sadly, on the 19th of February 2019, Karl Lagerfeld died at the age of 85. His right-hand woman, Virginie Viard, who joined Chanel as an intern in 1987, was named Lagerfeld's successor after his death, as the first woman designer at the helm of the house since the days of Gabrielle Chanel herself. I believe Viard has revived the original ethos of Gabrielle Chanel herself, referencing her youthful, independent, feminine and streamlined silhouettes of the 1910s, 20s and 30s. For so long we've been used to Lagerfeld's version of Chanel that we have come to take it as gospel truth, and some fashion critics will vehemently defend his vision for the brand, dismissing Vuillard's attempts as poor or not worthy. Although Vuillard has not been at the helm of the house long enough to make her mark, her return to the aesthetics and ethos of the house's founder is an interesting journey and one that I am intrigued to follow. Gabrielle Coco Chanel remains one of the most influential fashion designers of the 20th century. A fashion icon who embodied her own ideal, she was the archetype of the post-World War I New Woman, youthful, independent, lithe and athletic. Rejecting all prior notions of Belle Epoch beauty and elegance, from the offset her designs were characterised by an imbued sense of modernity and timeless style. A colourful character in controversial life, shall we say, Chanel's career was cut into two clear periods, but her legacy and vocabulary of style have been perpetuated throughout the history of 20th century fashion up to the present day. Through Karl Lagerfeld and now Virginie Vuillard, Gabrielle's original design ethos has sustained its allure, stood the test of time and survived fashion's ever-changing landscape. As Gabrielle Chanel once said, "Fashion changes, but style endures." That's it for the extraordinary life and legacy of fashion and Chanel. I'll see you next time, but before you go, don't forget to subscribe to Fashion And with me, Scott Schiavone, Fashion Curator.